Pakistan accused of gross incompetence and negligence, the US of an act of war. A report into the killing of the world's most wanted man is leaked to Al Jazeera. So, who knew what in the hunt for Osama bin Laden? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Sami Zaidan. It was a military mission that humiliated Pakistan and strained relations with the US. Now, a report obtained by Al Jazeera's investigative unit is offering a scathing critique of the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Well, the Abbottabad Commission details the comprehensive failure of Pakistan to detect the presence of bin Laden for almost 10 years. It blames gross incompetence and negligence at almost every level of Pakistan's security. The Commission also criticizes Pakistan's leaders for failing to detect CIA activities on its soil, and it says it couldn't rule out that rogue Pakistani intelligence officials had shielded bin Laden. Well, the report is also critical of what it calls the illegal manner in which the US conducted the raid on bin Laden's compound. It describes it as an American act of war and accuses the US of acting like a criminal thug. Well, the CIA is also accused of failing to share information with Pakistan on bin Laden's whereabouts. To our discussion in a moment. At first, Josh Bernstein looks at US-Pakistani relations in the build-up to bin Laden's death.
The report focuses on the fact that the U.S. raid not only killed bin Laden, but also 3 Pakistani citizens while violating the nation's airspace. In Islamabad, leaders only learned about it on television. Not long after, there were protests across the country. U.S. Admiral Mike Mullen, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States, only called Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff at 5 a.m. the next morning, 6 hours after the raid began. The raid was the greatest humiliation visited upon the country since its breakup in 1971. Ever since the war in Afghanistan in 2001, Pakistan was always an unenthusiastic ally in what the U.S. called its war on terror.
President Musharraf was enthusiastic, I think, primarily because he saw a way to get his country out of pariah status in the 10-year divorce it had with the United States. There were others, particularly ISI, which for 10 years had fostered a different policy.
The U.S. became frustrated and planned to hunt for bin Laden alone, but for that, it needed access. According to the report, the U.S. turned to the Pakistani ambassador to the U.S., Hussein Haqqani. The report accuses Haqqani of providing hundreds of visas, which ultimately facilitated the unilateral manhunt for Osama bin Laden. That is something he strongly denies.
During the meeting with the Commission, I very clearly pointed out to them that there was no unauthorized visa issued. And very frankly, I don't think the Navy SEALs came into Pakistan with visas issued by the Embassy of Pakistan in the United States.
In the years after 2005, the relationship soured even further, with the U.S. accusing Pakistan of tipping off jihadists ahead of American raids. The report acknowledges a shortage of mutual appreciation, a lack of regard and trust in this contingent, transactional, and often resentful relationship.
Yeah, I think there's every reason not to have trust. From their point of view, for historical reasons, from our point of view, as we find it very difficult to understand how they can consort with the Talibs who are killing Americans.
By 2011, the U.S. was regularly conducting drone operations within Pakistan. The report says the buildup of U.S. aggressiveness and hostility were noted, but their policy implications were not dealt with seriously. And in the run-up to the raid itself, explicit threats were communicated by Barack Obama, but all of them were either ignored or discounted. This was a massive and irresponsible lack of due diligence. The report paints a picture of Pakistan as manipulated and undermined by the U.S. Pakistan's spy chief says the nation had become too weak and dependent to defend itself against U.S. policies. And none of the other political, security, and intelligence agencies had the knowledge, the will, or the authority to combat the spread of the CIA's tentacles all over the country. Today, the U.S. drones still fly over Pakistan. Relations are at a low, but still, a key question of the report remains unanswered. What is Pakistan's policy when it's threatened by a superpower like the U.S.?
Plenty to discuss then with our guests in our Washington studios. Robert Grenier, he served as the CIA's top counter-terrorism official and as a CIA station chief in Islamabad. Joining us from Islamabad is Talat Masood. He's a retired Pakistani Army general and now a defense analyst. And here in Doha we have Phil Rees from Al Jazeera's investigative unit. He's been studying the report. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Phil, we've got to ask the question first of all. You've looked at this report. When you look at the authors, when you look at the sources, is it credible? Is it reliable?
It's very credible and very reliable. I think it's evidence that there is a sort of independent body of people that do exist. One of them is a Chief Justice, one of them is a retired soldier. I think that the report shows remarkable independence.
All right, Robert Grenier, where does this report leave suspicions that people have had that whether Pakistan was officially or state institutions were trying to hide bin Laden or sort of colluding in the hiding of bin Laden?
I think the authors of the report are quite careful not to state definitively things that they cannot know definitively. And so, as was mentioned in the earlier comments, they say they can't exclude the possibility that there were some officials who were knowledgeable, at least on an unofficial basis, if you will. But they leave us in no doubt that they certainly don't believe that there was any sort of official collusion on the part of Pakistani authorities.
And is that where U.S. intelligence assessments stand at this point? They can't exclude it as a possibility,
but they can cite no evidence for it.
Is that where U.S. intelligence estimates stand at this point?
Oh, well, I don't know what official U.S. intelligence estimates are, but as an informed observer, I never thought that there was official Pakistani collusion, even at the time of the raid.
Okay, that's we'll bring in Talat Masood. What sort of picture is now emerging about life for bin Laden on the run and during the 10 years, almost 10 years in which he was in Pakistan?
Well, he was seemed to be moving initially from one place to the other. He made more or less about 4 stops before he really settled in Abbottabad. And there, I think he was there. So overall, he stayed for over 9 years, as you said. And he seemed to be reasonably comfortable. He thought that he would never be detected. And obviously, many questions do arise. And I think the report is very clear on that, that there seems to be some sort of a high level of incompetence, but there is no complicity as far as the Pakistan government or intelligence agencies or the military were concerned. So I think that aspect is fairly clear. But the question is that they haven't come to any conclusion as far as that aspect is concerned. They have left it a little vague because after all, how did then the Americans came to know as to where Osama was residing, and how did they then go through the whole exercise of raiding and violating Pakistan's space and capturing Osama bin Laden and killing him.
Phil Rees, there is a bit of sarcasm in the report when it talks about, the role of Pakistani institutions in this. Where does that sarcasm, I guess, leave the suspicions that perhaps individuals colluded in an unofficial capacity with bin Laden's support network?
Well, the report concludes that there must have been a support network, a Pakistani support network, which is outside of the people in the house. That is the 2 brothers who were primarily helping him, and indeed his son who is there. So the question is, who were they? Now, you said sarcasm. That section reeks with irony, almost disbelief as to how could the intelligence agencies, which are all powerful, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate is feared throughout Pakistan. It is the only real functioning institution. Yet, when it comes to this, it seems to be incredibly ignorant and seems to be completely asleep on the job. And I think that the report does lay open the possibility of complicity. It admits that it's beyond its brief to be able to find that. It's incapable of finding it, but it certainly keeps the door ajar that there is complicity at some level. Now, where that level is, we don't know. But I spoke to defense analysis in Pakistan over the past few days. That couldn't be just some junior guy at the local station. It had to be at a relatively senior level.
All right, Talat Masood, I mean, how do you assess the answer to that question? The question of just how they could be such a large scale of incompetence as painted by this report at all levels of the Pakistani authorities?
Well, I would say that there is no doubt about it that there has been huge incompetence. And this is the first time that the report, which consisted of members of the commission who are really a part of, or at least were a part of the establishment, first time criticizing the establishment in a way that they did. But when it came to collusion, they have left that, chapter somewhat open. And my own view is that there was no collusion as far as I could make out. And
even on terms of on an individual level?
No, yeah, I'm coming to that. But it's very much possible that there was some sort of a collusion at the, field level, at the, local level. And it could also be not only with the, say, intelligence agencies or detachment, or it could also well be with the local authorities there, and it could be a combination of both. And the motivation for that could be financial. The motivation could be financial as well as ideological among the people who were supportive of Osama.
All right, Robert Grenier, how much has been learned since the killing of Osama bin Laden about the support network for him?
Well, actually not very much. And what's interesting is that in all of this trove of information, computers, thumb drives, all sorts of electronic media, as well as documents that were seized from the site by the SEALs and that were subsequently analyzed, a fair amount of which, perhaps a surprising amount of which, has actually been divulged publicly. There is nothing in all that information that I'm aware of which indicates either collusion on the part of Pakistani officials, officially or unofficially, nor does it suggest that there was an extensive Pakistani network. Now, obviously, the members of the commission in their report indicate that there are some things that they don't know. But in light of all of this speculation about large support networks and some sort of official involvement, the authors of the report can cite no evidence for that other than simply speculating. And so I think, quite frankly, this is the weakest part of the report. Let me just interject one other aspect here, and this is something which is suggested, but to my knowledge not stated in the report. And that is that it seems to me, at least, that one of the main reasons why Pakistani officials were not able to find bin Laden is because, quite frankly, they did not want to find bin Laden. There were not active efforts made. In fact, it states in the report that there were not active official efforts made to try to track down bin Laden outside of the context of U.S.
Why do you think that was the case, Mr. Grenier?
My view is that bin Laden was in an entirely different category. There was very effective cooperation between the ISI and the CIA in tracking down many members, including very senior members of Al-Qaeda. But bin Laden was unique in terms of his political impact and the sensitivity surrounding him. And I think that it was anticipated by Pakistani officials that if they were to capture him and turn him over, that this would create something of a political firestorm. Frankly, I think that they were hoping that he would never come to light. When I know when General Musharraf would be asked about it in public, he would say, no, we don't think he's in our country at all. He must be somewhere in Afghanistan. I think they were simply hoping that the problem would go away.
Talat Masood, do you agree with that? In a sense, perhaps he was too much of a hot potato.
Well, I would very much agree with him, and I think what also happened is they thought probably if at all he is even here, firstly they never thought that he was here, but if he was here, then I think they thought that he was mostly ineffective, and in any case we should go for those who are more important in the sense that they are at the moment operational as far as insurgency and terrorism is concerned.
But what Mr. Grenier seems to be suggesting is it would be too politically embarrassing to find him in Pakistan and present the problem of what to do with him. So,
yeah, absolutely. So that I agree with him that it would be. But on the contrary, I also have another view about it. look, if Pakistan high-ups knew where he was, then surely it would have been, they could have taken all the credit, and Pakistan would then have been a darling of the US and the West, that Osama, the icon of terrorism, has been captured by Pakistan and handed over. But this they could have also done very subtly, giving an impression as though they were not truly, totally responsible for it, not to take
I
the
can
backlash
see Phil
of it.
Reese is shaking his head and wants to get into this discussion. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, I think there's another interpretation of what Robert Grenier and General Massoud have said. Of course he was a hot potato. He was a massive hot potato. The instinct of the ISI, therefore, is not to simply turn its back and think, well, we're not going to do anything about this. You know, their energy would be directed to make sure that he was kept quiet. And perhaps he was kept there. And, you know, this is, of course, speculation. I mean, the report does not say this, but believe me, it hints at it. I think if you look at the quotes when he said how lucky bin Laden was that every institution, including the ISI, was looking the other way and all this. Well, I mean, the truth is that perhaps he was a bargaining chip. But we know the involvement of the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency with the Taliban. They've got the number 2 they picked up there. We know what's going on in Afghanistan. We know the popularity of bin Laden in Pakistan. For them to hand him over to the United States, I think would have been politically too much of a time bomb for them to deal with, for either the civil or the military institutions there, to be honest with you. So if they did know then they had him there, what are they going to do with him? Send him to Guantanamo, to civil trial? I mean, the whole complexities of what would happen was too much. So yes, they did want to look the other way, but I think they deliberately did.
All right, Phil, though, if we could shift gears a little bit, let's talk about the implications of this report for Pakistan today, particularly Pakistani institutions. Do you think it's going to prompt some kind of massive reform or review of how things work in the country?
Well, in terms of sort of concrete evidence, and you know, a lot of what we've just said, of course, is speculation. That is the most damning and embarrassing part of it. It shows a civilian government that basically doesn't care. I mean, the defense minister never talked to the ISI at all, and he's meant to be their boss, by the way. It showed a civilian leadership that had no idea what was going on and was simply there to basically cream their pockets. It doesn't put it in quite such direct terms, but that's implied. Now, I mean, I think that it's laid bare something that many of us had observed before, and I think that this is the question now. Is there a civil and a part of the establishment, and as General Massoud mentioned, the authors of the report are part of the establishment, but they're away from the traditional two parties who've governed Pakistan, like sort of almost, if I can say, like sort of a mafia state. So they're able to sort of look at this, and we've seen with the growth of the judiciary as well, they're exercising its power in recent years. Perhaps we're seeing within the establishment and within the elite a kind of civil society which is not going to accept the kind of faux democracy that Pakistan has had over the past 3 or 4 decades. That is, even when the military wasn't ruling directly.
Let me bring General Massoud back into this. You, of course, you've served in the Pakistani military. I'm wondering what you think when you read parts of the report that say that if a similar raid was to occur again, for example, Pakistan would be unable to prevent it. I mean, there must be parts of this report that make your skin cringe.
Absolutely, because there is so much of investment and resources that have been going into the military, and the image that the military and the intelligence have in Pakistan, to a large extent, it did suffer a very serious damage as a result of all this. And people then started asking questions. But nonetheless, they realized that obviously Americans can still violate the airspace and get away with it because of their superior technology, and also the fact that Pakistan, truly speaking, at that time was not looking to the West and had left that border more or less undefended. That excuse probably they would buy for a while. But now that this act took place, and especially the way that the border is hostile now, the western border, Pakistan is in a trap in a way. Both the eastern and the western borders need to be defended. And does it have the resources? And does it have the support of the international community? And if its allies are the ones which are going to violate its sovereignty, both through drones and through such acts as we saw in Osama bin Laden's raid, then what sort of expectations there are both from the government and the allies?
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Robert Grenier, where does this report leave suspicions of private Pakistani collusion with US policy that's sometimes called a violation of Pakistani sovereignty?
Well, again, you would expect that people responsible for air defense, the Pakistani Air Force and others would be quite defensive, and I think they were quite defensive when they were interviewed by the members of the commission. And yet, I think that the story which has come through, which says that they simply did not have, they were not expecting an air intrusion from the West. Yes, the western border is problematic, but it's problematic because of militants on the ground, not because of expected incursions from the air, and certainly not by a Western superpower. So I think that their explanations for why they were unable to detect this military activity do ring true, and I think that they're understandable. Needless to say that there are probably some things that would have to change in the future. So I really don't see any evidence for any sort of official collusion or turning a blind eye to what the Americans were doing. I think that the Pakistan military was genuinely surprised.
Well, let me ask you this question then, Mr. Grenier. You've served with the CIA and you've served in Islamabad. The sort of picture that's painted here in the report about, well, I guess you could call it some kind of support base for the CIA in Pakistan, is that accurate?
When you talk about a support base for the CIA in Pakistan, but again, you're talking about some sort of an independent CIA network, so I want to make sure I understand what you're referring to.
Yes, operating outside of the control of the Pakistani government, implicated, or there's a hint at implication in setting up the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. There are names mentioned associated with intelligence, Pakistani intelligence figures. I mean, it does look like there is some kind of CIA network in the country.
Well, certainly that's always possible, and that's what international spy agencies are charged with doing. Now, needless to say, the U.S. Policy and U.S. intelligence has been best served, I think, by its cooperation with the ISI, and I think that we can point to a great many successes that have occurred and that have redounded to the credit of both countries. That said, I certainly don't exclude the possibility that there was some independent activity going on. Although I will say that I think within the report, where they're talking about things that are relatively unknown, I think that the report's authors allow themselves to speculate a little bit wildly. Reference to hundreds of visas that were issued, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think the reason that there were large numbers of visas that were issued for American officials coming in and out of Pakistan was because, yes, there were a significant number of people who needed to be there in order to cooperate with Pakistani authorities, and also they tended to come for very short periods of time. So over time, yes, you had a great many people who were coming and going, but I think that the aspect of that seems far more sinister than in fact it is.
Okay, let me bring Phil Reese to weigh in on this. Like I said, you've gone through this very carefully. What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, I quote you here the Director General of the ISI at the time. He said that he had a, quote, political understanding with America over their use of drones, though nothing was in writing. And this echoes what the foreign minister at the time as well said, that certain agreements had been made, but nothing in writing. So nobody could be accused of something afterwards. So what it suggests is that there is this backhanded relationship going on. Quite frankly, the Pakistani population would be extremely angry to know of this. So there's no transparency in terms of the US relationship with Pakistan. It suits neither side. And therefore, when it comes to the ISI again, either this feared, powerful, extremely well-funded agency is again, quite frankly, stupid and unable to spot, quite a lot of CIA activity around it, or there might be some kind of collusion at some level. And indeed, it's one of its own former members, Colonel Saeed Iqbal, who was involved in taking pictures around the place there. He was on a house claiming to take pictures of dogs. In fact, there was a neighbor's house. You could see the compound. Now he's disappeared. And the report suggests that obviously he was a CIA man. So clearly, the CIA has been doing its job. But I think the question that is unanswered is how much some elements of the ISI may have known about that as well.
So a lot of questions still to be answered, but for now we'll have to leave the discussion there. Let's thank our guests, Robert Grenier, Talat Masood and Phil Reese. And don't forget, you can find this show and many more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the link for shows. And also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Why not leave us your comments there too? Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.